18 months. 18 months since I'd signed my name on those papers and walked out of the glass tower on Bay Street, with nothing but a cardboard box and the quiet kind of relief that feels almost like grief. I told myself I was free. I told myself I'd made the right choice. I told myself that every morning, while I made oatmeal in my small apartment in Leslieville, while I listened to the streetcar rattle past my window, while I lay awake at 2 a.m., staring at the water stain on my ceiling that looked, if you tilted your head, exactly like the outline of a man's shoulders. His shoulders. But that's not where this story starts. Or maybe it is. Maybe everything starts with him, even the parts I tried so hard to make about something else. My daughter's name is Piper. She was 13 months old on the night everything fell apart and came back together in the span of about 4 hours. She had her father's dark eyes, the kind that look almost black in low light but turn amber in the sun. And my stubbornness, which her pediatrician called strong-willed and her grandmother called exhausting. I called it survival. She'd need it, I figured, growing up the way we were. We were living in a 2-bedroom apartment on Gerrard Street East. The second bedroom was barely big enough for Piper's crib, and the second-hand dresser I'd painted white one Saturday afternoon while she napped. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I was working 3 days a week at a dental office in Riverdale, and the other 2 at a cafe on Queen, and I'd figured out exactly how much I needed to earn each month to cover rent, daycare, groceries, the bus pass, and nothing else. There was no margin. There was no emergency fund. There was just a very precise calculation I ran in my head every single morning, the way some people run through affirmations or prayer. I hadn't told him about Piper. I know how that sounds. I've rehearsed the explanation so many times it's practically worn smooth. Like a stone you keep turning over in your pocket, and I still don't know if it holds up under scrutiny. But here's the truth of it. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks before I left. 3 weeks before I sat across from him in the kitchen of that penthouse and told him I couldn't do it anymore. I'd taken the test in the bathroom of a Tim Hortons on King Street. Of all places, sitting on a closed toilet lid, with the little white stick balanced on my knee, and I'd thought immediately, with a clarity that surprised me, he can never know. Not because he was a bad man, not exactly, but because he was the kind of man whose world had a certain gravity to it. Once you were in his orbit, you didn't leave. You adapted. You made yourself smaller, or you made yourself harder, or you learned to love the life he'd already designed without you. I'd tried all 3. None of them worked. His name was Beckett Harland. He ran a private equity firm based out of Toronto that his father had built, and he had doubled and then tripled in the space of a decade. He wasn't loud about it. That was the thing about Beckett. He wasn't the kind of wealthy that announced itself. No flashy cars, no loud suits. He wore the same style of charcoal wool coat every winter, drove a sensible SUV, drank his coffee black. But the penthouse was the penthouse, and the connections were the connections. And when he walked into a room, people rearranged themselves without even noticing they were doing it. I'd been his assistant. I know. But I want to say, for whatever it's worth, that it wasn't like that, not in the way people assume. We were colleagues for almost 2 years before anything happened. He was professional to the point of stiffness. I was good at my job. We had a mutual respect that was, I think, genuinely mutual. And then one evening in February, working late in the office, the heat had gone out, and he'd given me his coat without being asked. And something about that small, quiet gesture had cracked something open in me that I couldn't close again. We were married 14 months later, and divorced 18 months after that. The problem wasn't that he didn't love me. I think he did, in his way. The problem was that his way of loving someone left very little room for the person being loved. He made decisions without consulting me, not out of cruelty, out of habit, out of the conviction, deeply held and probably unconscious, that he simply knew best. He'd been running an empire since he was 26. It was hard to turn that off at home. We'd talked about children once, or I'd tried to talk about it. He hadn't been dismissive, exactly. He'd said he wasn't opposed to it, eventually. He'd said his schedule was too unpredictable right now. He'd said we should revisit it in a year. And when a year passed and I brought it up again, he'd said the same thing, almost word for word, and I'd understood then that eventually, was a door he kept moving down the hallway just ahead of me. So I left. And I didn't tell him about the small, stubborn, amber-eyed person I was already carrying. It was a Thursday in November when Piper got sick. Not sniffly nose sick. Not cranky from teething sick. I'm talking the kind of sick where you pick up your child and she's so hot she feels like she's radiating from the inside and her breathing sounds wrong, and she looks at you with this terrifying blankness, like she's looking through you at something very far away. I called the telehealth line first because I was terrified of the OHIP wait times at emergency, and I am not proud of this, because I was terrified of the bill if there turned out to be nothing wrong. The nurse on the line listened to me describe Piper's symptoms for 45 seconds, and then said, very calmly, "You need to take her to the emergency department right now. Don't wait." I bundled her into her snowsuit with shaking hands. She didn't fight it. That scared me more than anything. Piper always fought the snowsuit. I didn't have a car. I called an Uber and stood on the sidewalk in the November cold, holding my daughter against my chest, counting her breaths. The triage nurse at St. Michael's took one look at us and moved us up the queue immediately. That's how I knew it was real. They got Piper stabilized in the first hour. Respiratory syncytial virus, RSV, with a secondary infection. Serious but treatable. She needed IV antibiotics and oxygen support and monitoring overnight. The pediatric resident who explained this to me was kind and spoke slowly, which I appreciated because my brain had essentially stopped processing language in anything but single words. Sick. Okay. Stay. Breathe. And then the admissions nurse came in with a tablet and a form. "I just need to complete the intake information," she said. "Mom's health card number. Got that." "Emergency contact?" I gave her my mum's number in Hamilton. "And the father? Is he listed anywhere? We like to have both parents' information for our records, especially for little ones. It helps with medical history on both sides." I opened my mouth, closed it. "Does he have any family history of respiratory issues? Cardiac conditions?" And I thought about Beckett's mother, who'd had rheumatic fever as a child. About the conversation I'd had once with his aunt at a family dinner, about some genetic thing that ran through the Harland men. I'd filed it away at the time as the kind of information a wife should know. I'd never expected to need it like this. "I'd need to contact him," I said. "Of course," the nurse said, and left me with the tablet. I sat there for a long time looking at Piper's face. The oxygen monitor on her finger was tiny and pink, and the machine beeped steadily. And I watched her small chest rise and fall, and I thought, what are you doing? What have you been doing? I found his number in my old phone. I'd kept it, not out of sentimentality, I told myself, but because deleting it felt too deliberate, too much like a statement. My hands were shaking when I pressed call. It rang twice. "This is Beckett." His voice. The same voice. I'd forgotten, or told myself I'd forgotten, how it landed. Low, precise, completely controlled. "It's me," I said. And then, because I couldn't think of any way to make this easier, "It's Maeve." Silence. 1 beat. 2. "Maeve." Not a question. Not really. "I need to tell you something," I said. "And I need you to let me get through it before you say anything." "Can you do that?" Another pause. "Yes." So I told him. I told him everything, in the most compressed and efficient version I could manage, sitting in a plastic chair in a pediatric bay at St. Michael's Hospital with monitors beeping around me and my daughter asleep 2 feet away. I told him about the test at Tim Hortons, about why I hadn't said anything, about Piper. Her name, her age, the fact that she had his eyes, the fact that she was sick and they'd asked about family medical history. And I'd realized I'd been selfish in a way I hadn't let myself fully see before. When I finished, the silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "What hospital?" he said. "Beckett, you don't have to." "What hospital, Maeve?" "St. Michael's down. Town." But the call ended. He arrived 40 minutes later. I know because I'd been watching the door with a sick, tense feeling in my stomach that was equal parts dread and something else I didn't want to name. He walked in wearing that same charcoal coat. He looked exactly the same and completely different all at once. Older, maybe, or just more deliberate, like he'd consolidated himself into something denser. His eyes went straight to Piper. He stood at the edge of the bay and looked at her for a long time without saying anything. I stood up. I know I should have, Don't, he said quietly. Not right now. So we didn't. We sat on opposite sides of Piper's crib for the next 2 hours and didn't talk about any of it. A nurse came in and Beckett asked her precise, methodical questions about the RSV, about the secondary infection, about the IV antibiotic they were running, and whether it was first-line treatment. The nurse was slightly startled and then answered him fully. Because there was something about the way Beckett asked questions that made people want to give him complete answers. I watched him watch Piper. I watched him notice her eyes when she half woke and blinked at him. I watched the expression that moved across his face. Just for a second, just a flicker, before he controlled it again. Around 1 a.m., Piper was sleeping soundly and the resident had confirmed she was responding well and was out of immediate danger. Beckett went to get coffee from the vending machine and came back with 2 cups. He handed me one without asking if I wanted it. Tell me about her, he said. So I did. All of it. The first smile. 6 weeks early, which the books say isn't supposed to happen, but it did. The way she'd taken to solid food with a ferocious enthusiasm that had made me laugh so hard I'd cried. The fact that she said, "Uh-oh," before she said mama. The way she'd started pulling herself up on the coffee table lately and standing there with this expression of pure triumphant disbelief, like she couldn't quite believe her own body had done that. He listened to all of it. He asked questions. He was, and this is the hardest thing to explain, the most present I had ever seen him. Like whatever internal mechanism usually kept part of him somewhere else had finally, fully switched off. Why didn't you tell me? He asked eventually, quietly, without accusation. Because I knew you'd want to be involved, I said. And I didn't know how to let that happen without... I stopped. Started again. I didn't know how to let you back into my life in any way without losing the rest of it. He was quiet for a moment. That was my fault. It wasn't. It was, he said. You knew how I operated. You'd lived with it. You weren't wrong to be afraid of it. I didn't know what to do with that. I'd spent 18 months building a case against him in my own head so that I could keep the door closed. And he was standing there quietly dismantling it from the outside. She needs both of us, I said finally. That's all I know right now. She needs both of us, and I was wrong to make that call for her. Yes, he said. She does. We looked at Piper. She'd kicked 1 foot free of the blanket the way she always did. The next several weeks were complicated in the way that only situations involving lawyers, a shared child, and unresolved feelings between 2 adults who are trying very hard to be mature can be complicated. Beckett was respectful. He didn't push. He didn't use his money as a lever. And believe me, he could have, because Beckett Harland had the kind of legal resources that could make a custody process very uncomfortable very quickly. He didn't do any of that. He asked to be introduced to Piper slowly. He showed up when he said he would. He left when it was time to leave. Piper, for her part, took to him the way babies sometimes take to certain people. Immediately and completely, and without any apparent reason. The first time he held her, she grabbed his thumb and didn't let go, and he looked up at me over her head with an expression that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It was my colleague at the dental office, a woman named Harriet, who I'd always trusted, who told me that Beckett had been asking around about me. Not in a threatening way, just asking. Keeping tabs in the quiet way he kept tabs on everything. I'd known this for a while, actually. I'd suspected it, but hearing it from Harriet felt different, because Harriet also told me what she'd told him. That I was good, that I was managing, that I was happy enough, most days. He asked me if you were seeing anyone, Harriet said, very carefully not looking at me. What did you tell him? I told him that was none of his business, she said. And then I told him no. I thought about that conversation for a long time. It was late January when things shifted. Piper was fully recovered, thriving, terrorizing the cats at my mum's place in Hamilton on the weekends. Beckett and I had settled into a co-parenting routine that was functional and civil, and occasionally, around the edges, something warmer than that. He texted me one evening, just, "Are you free to talk?" I called him back. Old habit. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what I want to say to you. And I've been trying to find a way to say it that isn't. That doesn't sound like I'm running a boardroom presentation." I laughed, surprised myself. "I'm going to say it badly," he said. "I know that, but I think I need to say it anyway." A pause. I spent 18 months after you left trying to understand what went wrong, and I kept arriving at the same answer, and then refusing to accept it, because accepting it meant accepting that I'd been the kind of person I don't want to be. That I took you for granted in ways I didn't even have the self-awareness to see at the time. That I made you feel like a variable in my life that I could optimize around rather than a person I was supposed to be building something with. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I don't know why. My legs just decided that was where we were going. I'm not saying this to get something, he said. I want to be clear about that. Whatever you decide, about us, about anything, I'm in Piper's life regardless. That's not contingent on anything. But I didn't want to keep not saying it, because I've already spent too much time not saying things I should have said. Outside my window, the streetcar rattled past. Same as always. I don't know what I want, I said. I don't know if I can trust that it would be different. That's fair, he said immediately. I'm not the same person I was when we got married, I know. Neither am I. I'd need it to be slow, I said. I'd need to be. I looked for the word, consulted. On things that affect me. Yes, he said, not defensively. Just yes. And I'd need you to actually hear me when I say something isn't working. Not file it away for later. Not manage it. Yes. I don't know if you can do that. Neither do I, he said, but I know I want to try. And I know I understand now what it costs when I don't. The streetcar had passed. The street was quiet. In the next room, through the baby monitor, I could hear Piper's even, peaceful breathing. The sound that still, every single night, made something in my chest unclench. I'd done that. I'd kept her safe and warm, and here, in this small apartment, with the painted white dresser, and the too precise monthly budget and the water stain on the ceiling. I'd done all of it alone, and I'd been proud of it. Ferociously proud of it. The way you're proud of things that cost you something real. But I was also tired. And there was a version of the future that looked different from this one. And the man on the other end of the phone wasn't the same man I'd left. Or maybe he was the same man, but I was seeing something in him now that I hadn't known to look for before. Or maybe he'd always had it in him and it had taken losing everything to bring it to the surface. I don't know. I still don't know entirely. Okay, I said. A pause. Okay? Slow, I said. And I reserve the right to change my mind at any point. Understood, he said. And I could hear it, just barely, just underneath the control, that he was smiling. It's spring now. Piper is walking. Properly walking. Not the Frankenstein lurch she was doing in February. Real walking, confident and fast, with her arms swinging and her face set in that expression of total determination that she gets from both of us. Honestly, so there's no hope for her there. Beckett comes on Sundays. He brings coffee. Mine, specifically, oat milk flat white, which he learned without asking because he just paid attention. And we take Piper to the park on Withrow Avenue and watch her attack the sandbox with the focused intensity of someone with a very important geological project. He pushes her on the swings. She laughs that full-body laugh that I think is the best sound in the world. And he catches me watching her, and we share this look, this small private look that doesn't have a name yet, but is becoming its own language. We are not where we were. We are not where we will be. We are somewhere in between, which is uncomfortable and uncertain, and also, if I'm being honest, kind of remarkable. I didn't plan for any of this. I didn't plan for the Tim Hortons bathroom, or the November emergency room, or the vending machine coffee at 1 a.m. I didn't plan for the way Piper grabbed his thumb and held on, but I have learned, slowly, at the cost of a great deal of sleep and one particularly tearful drive down the 403, that the life you plan and the life you actually get are almost never the same thing. And sometimes the one you actually get is harder and messier and asks more of you. And sometimes it's also better. Not better in the clean, simple way you imagined when you were planning. Better in a way that's earned and complicated and real. Piper let go of the sandbox and turned around and held her arms up to me, and I picked her up, and she immediately reached past my shoulder toward Beckett, which is what she does now. Divides herself between us with the cheerful practicality of someone who's figured out she doesn't have to choose. She's right, I think. She's always right.